The late afternoon sun, a bruised orange, bled across the horizon, painting the vast expanse of the Pacific in hues of amethyst and rose. Elara sat on a weathered piece of driftwood, the cool, damp sand seeping into her worn jeans, a familiar comfort. The rhythmic whisper of the waves, a constant lullaby, had been her only companion for weeks, a balm to the raw edges of her soul. She watched a lone gull circle overhead, its cry a mournful echo against the vast silence. This secluded stretch of beach, far from the bustling boardwalks and tourist traps, had become her sanctuary, a place where the weight of the world felt a little less crushing, where the ghosts of her past seemed to recede with the outgoing tide. For months she had sought anonymity, a quiet corner of the world where she could simply exist, unburdened by expectations or the piercing gaze of judgment. Her life had been a series of careful evasions, each step away from her former self, a deliberate act of self-preservation. Then the piercing blue and white of a police cruiser broke the serene tableau. It crunched slowly over the packed sand, its tires leaving deep, deliberate tracks in the pristine canvas of the beach. Elara's breath hitched. Her heart, a drum against her ribs, began a frantic rhythm. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear into the fading light, to become one with the shadows lengthening across the dunes. But she was frozen, a deer caught in headlights, her mind a frantic scramble of worst-case scenarios. Had they found her? Was it about that? The questions, sharp and unwelcome, clawed at the fragile peace she had painstakingly constructed. Two officers, their uniforms crisp and authoritative against the muted backdrop of the beach, emerged from the vehicle. One, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, led the way. The other, a younger woman with a surprisingly gentle demeanor, followed a few paces behind. They moved with a purpose that sent a chill down Elara's spine, their eyes scanning the desolate stretch of sand until they landed on her. There was no mistaking it. They were coming for her. A wave of nausea washed over her, the salty air suddenly thick and suffocating. She gripped the rough wood beneath her fingers, knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the approaching figures. Each step they took felt like a hammer blow to her chest, echoing the relentless throb in her temples. Elara finally managed to nod, a stiff, almost imperceptible movement. Her voice, when it came, was a dry rasp. Questions? About what? The male officer, whose name tag identified him as Detective Miller, exchanged a glance with his partner, Officer Davies, before settling his gaze back on Elara. His expression remained unreadable, a professional mask that offered no clues. "We're investigating a matter that we believe you might have some information about, Ms. Vance." The use of her full name, a name she had tried to shed like an old skin, sent another jolt through her. They knew who she was. The anonymity she had so desperately sought, the quiet oblivion of the beach, had been an illusion. Her mind raced back, not to months, but to years, to a life that felt impossibly distant, yet still clung to her like a persistent shadow. 5 years ago, Elara Vance had been a different person. She had been a vibrant, ambitious artist, her studio filled with the scent of oil paint and turpentine, her canvases bursting with color and life. Her greatest inspiration, her muse, had been her younger sister, Lily. Lily, with her infectious laugh and boundless optimism, had been the light of Elara's world, a constant source of joy and purpose. They were inseparable, bound by a bond that transcended mere sisterhood, a shared history of childhood dreams and unwavering support. Then, the accident. A drunk driver, a rainy night, a crumpled car. Lily gone in an instant. The world had fractured, for Elara that day, shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Grief, a monstrous, suffocating beast, had consumed her, stripping away her passion, her ambition, her very identity. The legal proceedings that followed were a blur of cold courtrooms and sterile legal jargon. The driver, a wealthy socialite named Marcus Thorne, had walked away with a slap on the wrist, his expensive lawyers weaving a narrative of unfortunate circumstances and momentary lapse. Justice, Alara had learned, was a luxury not everyone could afford. The injustice had festered, a poisonous wound in her soul, turning her grief into a bitter, corrosive rage. She had fought, screamed, pleaded, but the system had remained impervious. In the aftermath, she had abandoned her art, her friends, her life. She had simply packed a small bag, left a note for her bewildered parents, and vanished, seeking refuge in the vast, indifferent anonymity of the coast. The beach had offered a temporary reprieve, a place where the roar of the ocean could sometimes drown out the screams of her inner turmoil. Detective Miller cleared his throat, pulling her back to the present. "We understand you were in the area of the old pier near the fishing docks on the night of November 12th, 5 years ago." Ilara's blood ran cold. November 12th. The date was seared into her memory, not for the accident, but for something else entirely, something she had sworn to herself she would take to her grave. It was the night she had done something desperate, something fueled by the raw, unadulterated pain of her loss and the burning desire for a justice the law had denied her. Her breath hitched. She had been so careful, so meticulous in covering her tracks. How could they possibly know? Officer Davies, sensing her growing agitation, spoke again, her voice softer this time. "Ms. Vance, we're not here to accuse you of anything. We just need to understand what you saw, or perhaps what you didn't see that night." The implication hung heavy in the air. They weren't talking about Lily's accident. They were talking about that night. The night she had finally snapped, the night she had confronted Marcus Thorne, the man who had stolen her sister's future. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead despite the cool evening air. Her mind raced, replaying the events of that fateful night, the desperate confrontation, the desperate act. The secret she had buried so deep, so carefully, was now threatening to claw its way to the surface. The waves continued their relentless assault on the shore, each crash a reminder of the impending storm. The memory of that night, sharp and vivid, slammed into Ilara with the force of a physical blow. The salt spray on her face, the biting wind, the desperate chill that had nothing to do with the ocean air. She had waited for him, a shadow among shadows near the abandoned fishing docks, a place where the city lights faded into a murky gloom. Marcus Thorne, arrogant and oblivious, had stumbled out of a nearby bar, his laughter echoing hollowly in the desolate night. He was celebrating something, probably another legal victory, another escape from consequence. Ilara had watched him, her heart a cold knot of fury, her mind consumed by the image of Lily's smiling face now forever absent. She had confronted him, her voice raw with grief and accusation. He had dismissed her, a drunken sneer on his lips, his words slurring into a dismissive wave of his hand. "Look, I'm sorry about your sister, but it was an accident. Move on." Those words, so casually cruel, had ignited a spark of madness within her. The details of what happened next were a blur of adrenaline and despair. A shove, a stumble, a sickening thud. The dark water of the harbor, reflecting the few scattered lights, had swallowed him whole. Ilara hadn't waited. She had fled, her, breath ragged, her mind screaming. She hadn't known if he was dead or alive. She hadn't cared. In that moment, all she felt was a twisted, fleeting sense of retribution. She had never heard anything about it on the news, no missing person reports, no police investigations. She had convinced herself that he must have survived, that he had simply disappeared, perhaps out of shame or fear. She had lived with the crushing weight of that uncertainty, the gnawing guilt, the constant fear of discovery. "Ms. Vance?" Detective Miller's voice, patient but firm, cut through her tormented reverie. "We have reason to believe you were the last person to see Marcus Thorne alive." The words hung in the air, cold and undeniable. Ilara's blood ran colder still. Alive. So, he hadn't survived. The sickening thud she remembered, the splash in the dark water. It hadn't been a figment of her grief-addled mind. He was dead, and they knew she was there. A tremor ran through her. Her, carefully constructed world built on sand was crumbling. Officer Davies knelt down, her expression softening. "We found something, Ms. Vance. Something that led us to you." She held up a small, tarnished silver locket. Ilara's breath caught. It was Lily's locket, a gift from their grandmother, engraved with Lily's initials and a tiny, delicate hummingbird. Ilara had given it to Lily on her 10th birthday, a symbol of their unbreakable bond. But how could Marcus Thorne have had it? Lily had been wearing it the day of the accident. It had never been recovered from the wreckage. A fresh wave of confusion mixed with a chilling dread washed over her. "We found this on the old pier, near where Mr. Thorne's body was recovered last week," Detective Miller explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "It was lodged in a crevice, hidden for years. Forensics identified the initials. We cross-referenced them with missing persons reports from that time. Your sister, Lily Vance. And then we found the connection to Marcus Thorne." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "It seems Mr. Thorne was not just involved in your sister's accident. He was also involved in something else that night, something that led to his death." Ilara stared at the locket, her mind reeling. Lily's locket, found where Marcus Thorne's body was recovered. It didn't make sense. If he had died that night, how could he have had Lily's locket? And why had it taken 5 years for his body to be found? A new, terrifying possibility began to form in her mind, a monstrous thought that threatened to eclipse even her own guilt. Had Marcus Thorne been responsible for more than just Lily's accident? Had he been involved in something even darker, something that connected to Lily in a way she couldn't yet comprehend? The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken questions and the chilling realization that the truth of that night was far more complex and far more sinister than she had ever imagined. The locket, a tangible link to her beloved sister, felt like a burning ember in Ilara's palm. She clutched it, the cool metal a stark contrast to the fire raging within her. Marcus Thorne. He had Lily's locket, she whispered, the words barely audible above the crashing waves. How? It was never found after the accident. Detective Miller nodded grimly. That's what we're trying to piece together, Ms. Vance. Our initial investigation into Mr. Thorne's disappearance 5 years ago was inconclusive. He was a man with many enemies and a significant amount of debt. We suspected he'd simply fled the country. But the discovery of his body and this locket changes everything. Officer Davies, observing Ilara's distraught expression, continued, her voice gentle. When Mr. Thorne's body was found, it was clear he hadn't just drowned. There were signs of a struggle, and the locket it was found clutched in his hand, almost as if he was holding onto it for dear life. Ilara's mind reeled. A struggle? Clutched in his hand? The pieces, disjointed and terrifying, began to click into place, forming a picture far more horrifying than her darkest imaginings. She remembered the desperate shove, the sickening thud, but she hadn't seen a struggle. She had just fled, consumed by her own pain and rage. We also found something else, Ms. Vance, Detective Miller stated, his voice now laced with a hint of something Ilara couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps pity, perhaps a grim understanding. A small waterproof camera. It was found near the locket, also wedged in the crevice. The salt water had corroded it significantly, but our tech team managed to recover some data. He paused, his gaze fixed on her. The camera belonged to Lily. Ilara gasped, a raw, guttural sound that tore from her throat. Lily's camera? Her sister had been an aspiring photographer, rarely seen without her trusty waterproof camera, documenting every moment of her vibrant life. But the camera, like the locket, had never been recovered from the accident scene. But how? Ilara stammered, her voice trembling. She was in the car. The accident? We believe, Officer Davies interjected, her voice heavy with the weight of the revelation, that Lily wasn't in the car when the accident happened. Not initially, at least. The world tilted on its axis. Ilara stared at them, her mind struggling to process the impossible words. What are you saying? Detective Miller stepped forward, his expression grave. The recovered footage from Lily's camera shows her at the old pier, on the night of November 12th, 5 years ago. She was filming something, and she wasn't alone. Marcus Thorne was there. A cold, unyielding dread settled in Alara's stomach, colder than any ocean current. Lily, at the pier with Marcus Thorne, on the night of his disappearance, and the night of her confrontation with him. This wasn't just about her guilt anymore. This was about Lily. Her sister, the innocent victim, was somehow intertwined with the man who had taken her life, in a way Alara had never conceived. The revelation was a seismic shock, shattering her perception of the past 5 years. Her grief, which had been a solitary burden, now felt like a shared tragedy, a mystery that had been hidden in plain sight. The truth, it seemed, was far more intricate and agonizing than the simple narrative of a drunk driver and an accidental death. The camera, Lily's camera, held the key to a secret that had been buried for too long, a secret that promised to redefine everything Alara thought she knew about her sister's final moments. The images from Lily's camera, projected onto a screen in the sterile police station, were a ghostly echo of a night Alara had desperately tried to forget. The shaky footage, grainy and distorted by years submerged in salt water, showed Lily, vibrant and alive, her camera pointed towards the old pier. Then Marcus Thorne appeared, not stumbling drunk as Alara had remembered, but agitated, arguing, with someone just out of frame. The audio was mostly static, but a few words cut through the crackle. "The money. You promised." And then, chillingly, "She knows." Ilara's breath hitched. She knows. Who was she? The camera then panned slightly, revealing a third figure, cloaked in shadow, their face obscured. A brief, violent struggle ensued between Thorne and this shadowy person. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't the confrontation she remembered. This was something else entirely. Lily, hidden behind a stack of crates, was clearly documenting something she shouldn't have seen. Then, a horrifying realization dawned on Alara. The accident. Lily's car. It had been found miles from the pier off a desolate coastal road. If Lily was at the pier, filming Marcus Thorne, how did her car end up there? Detective Miller paused the footage on a still image of the shadowy figure. "We believe this is the person Marcus Thorne was arguing with, and we believe this person is responsible for his death." He then fast-forwarded the footage. The camera, now dropped and lying on its side, captured a chaotic scene. The sounds of a struggle, a muffled cry, and then a sickening splash. Not the splash Alara remembered. This was louder, more definitive. And then the camera was picked up, a gloved hand briefly visible before the footage abruptly cut out. "We believe Lily witnessed Marcus Thorne's murder," Officer Davies stated, her voice somber, "and that the killer, realizing she had filmed the event, pursued her. They likely took her car, with her still inside, to a remote location to dispose of the evidence, staging the accident to look like a tragic mishap." The revelation hit Ilara like a tidal wave, washing away years of self-blame and corrosive guilt. Lily hadn't been an accidental victim of a drunk driver. She had been a witness, a brave, unsuspecting hero who had stumbled upon a crime and paid the ultimate price. Marcus Thorne's death, which Alara had believed herself responsible for, was a separate, more sinister event. The man she had confronted, the man she thought she had pushed into the harbor, must have been a different person. Or perhaps in her grief-stricken state, she had misremembered the details of her own desperate act. The thought that Lily had been murdered, that her death was not a random tragedy but a calculated act to silence a witness, was unbearable. Yet amidst the profound grief, a new emotion stirred, a fierce, burning desire for justice. Not just for Lily, but for Marcus Thorne too, whose death had been wrongly attributed and whose killer had walked free for 5 years. Who was the third person? Ilara demanded, her voice shaking with a newfound resolve. Who killed them? Detective Miller's expression hardened. That's what we're still working on. The footage is heavily corrupted, and the figure is almost entirely obscured. But we have a lead. A distinctive tattoo. barely visible on the gloved hand that picked up the camera. A stylized serpent. Ilara's mind raced. A serpent tattoo. She had seen it before, not on the night of the confrontation, but years ago, in a different context. A man from her past, a fleeting acquaintance from her art school days, who had always seemed to lurk in the periphery, a shadow at social gatherings. A man she had dismissed as harmless, eccentric, but now the memory of his unsettling gaze, his quiet intensity, took on a chilling new significance. The pieces were falling into place, a terrifying mosaic of betrayal and murder. The climax was approaching, and Ilara knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she was no longer just a witness to the past, but an active participant in its terrifying unraveling. She had to find him. She had to bring Lily's killer to justice. The name, when it finally surfaced from the depths of Ilara's memory, was a whisper on her lips. Julian Vance. Not her family, but a distant, estranged cousin. A black sheep of the family who had dabbled in shady dealings and disappeared years ago. The serpent tattoo. Julian had always been fascinated by ancient symbols, displaying a small, intricate serpent on his wrist, a mark he claimed represented rebirth. The police, acting on Ilara's fragmented memory, quickly confirmed Julian's connection to Marcus Thorne. They had been involved in a high-stakes art forgery ring, a secret operation that Thorne had threatened to expose. Lily, unknowingly, had captured the crucial evidence. The confrontation with Julian was not the dramatic showdown Ilara had envisioned. He was found hiding in a dilapidated warehouse, surrounded by canvases of stolen art, a pathetic figure consumed by paranoia and desperation. When Detective Miller presented the evidence, Julian broke, confessing to both Thorne's murder and Lily's, his voice a pathetic whimper as he recounted the events of that night. He had pushed Thorne into the harbor, then realizing Lily had witnessed everything. He had pursued her, forcing her into her car, driving to the remote road and staging the accident. He had taken the locket and camera as macabre trophies, intending to dispose of them later, but had accidentally dropped them on the pier in his haste. The confession, though horrifying, brought a strange, bittersweet sense of release to Ilara. The truth finally was out. Lily's memory was vindicated. Her sister hadn't died in a random, meaningless accident. She had been a hero, a silent witness to a crime, and her courage, even in death, had ultimately led to justice. The guilt that had gnawed at Ilara for 5 years, the crushing burden of believing she had contributed to Marcus Thorne's death, lifted. She had been wrong about her own actions that night, a victim of her own grief-fueled misinterpretation. The shove, the splash. It had been a desperate, futile attempt to confront Thorne, but not the act that ended his life. The police had confirmed her account of that night, her brief, desperate encounter with Thorne, which had been separate from the murder. Weeks turned into months. Julian Vance was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. The art forgery ring was dismantled, its members brought to justice. Ilara, no longer a fugitive from her past, slowly began to reclaim her life. The beach, once a sanctuary from her pain, became a place of healing and remembrance. She still visited it every day, but now, the whispers of the waves carried not the echoes of her grief, but the gentle murmur of peace. She found herself drawn back to her art studio, the scent of paint no longer a painful reminder, but a promise of new beginnings. Her canvases, once dark and brooding, began to fill with vibrant colors reflecting the renewed light within her. She painted Lily, not as a victim, but as the bright, courageous spirit she truly was, her smile radiating from the canvas. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in familiar hues of amethyst and rose, Ilara stood at the water's edge, the cool sand beneath her bare feet. She held Lily's locket, now polished and gleaming, a tangible symbol of their enduring bond. She thought of the police, their unexpected approach on the beach, the catalyst for the painful, yet ultimately liberating unraveling of the truth. It had been a terrifying encounter, but it had led her to a justice she had never thought possible, and to a profound understanding of her sister's final moments. She looked out at the vast ocean, its endless rhythm a comforting presence. The weight of her past was gone, replaced by a quiet strength, a resilience forged in the crucible of loss and discovery. The story of Lily, of Marcus Thorne, and of Julian Vance was a testament to the hidden truths that lie beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. Elara knew she would carry the memories, the scars, but she would also carry the love, the courage, and the profound sense of peace that had finally found its way back to her. The beach, her sanctuary, now felt like a beginning, not an end. "Ma'am," the male officer's voice cut through the silence, surprisingly calm yet laced with an undeniable authority that brooked no argument. He stopped a few feet away, his partner flanking him. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch and twist around them, turning the familiar landscape into something ominous and alien. Elara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She couldn't speak, couldn't form a coherent thought. Her carefully constructed facade of calm shattered, revealing the raw fear beneath. She had always known this day might come, had lived with the constant dread of it, but the reality was far more terrifying than any nightmare she had conjured. The female officer, noticing Elara's distress, offered a small, reassuring smile, though it did little to quell the rising panic. "We just need to ask you a few questions if you have a moment." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, a stark contrast to the imposing presence of her partner. Elara's eyes darted between them, searching for any hint of accusation, any flicker of recognition. Had her past finally caught up to her? Was this the end of her fragile sanctuary? The questions swirled, unanswered, as the officers waited, patiently, their presence a silent, undeniable demand for her attention. The waves continued their endless rhythm, oblivious to the storm brewing within her. The air grew colder as the sun dipped further, casting the beach in an eerie twilight. Elara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her life was about to change irrevocably. The reason for their approach remained shrouded in mystery, a dark cloud hanging over her solitary existence, threatening to unleash a deluge of forgotten pain. She braced herself, her heart pounding, for whatever revelation they were about to deliver.